All right, so welcome back. Last time Mr. Pierce and I spoke, we talked about the monarchic types, which is kind of his temperaments that are probably loosely based off Kiersey's temperaments, and I really like the way that Michael Pierce talks about each of the temperaments. So this week we're going to directly contrast the monarchic types with the democratic types. So, Michael, why don't you go ahead and just tell us which of the four types are in this temperament?
The democratic temperament, as I
Yes.
refer to it, is the NTP types, so the INTP and ENTP, and also the SFJ types, so the ISFJ and the ESFJ. The reason that they're grouped in the democratic quadra or temperament is because their functions are all the same in distinction from the other types. So while the monarchic types, I'm sure I went over this, but just to
Go ahead.
make
Yeah.
sure it's clear, the monarchic types have SE, NI, TE, and FI. So they have functions that in my system are all regarded as contextual. So they're purely contextual. Whereas the democratic types have the opposite functions to those, which are the universal functions, which would be SI, NE, TI, and FE. And so that's why that's a part of the reason also for calling the one temperament monarchical and the other temperament democratic, is because those are kind of two poles. Monarchical indicates sort of this top-down structure. You have the leader, the vision, and then everything follows after that, whereas democratic has this bottom-up structure to it, where the ultimate goal takes its lead from all of the different individual elements sort of coming up to form it. And that can manifest itself in the SFJ with the SFJ types, the ISFJ and ESFJ, that usually has more of a social
Right.
connotation about we want everybody's input. We want everybody to, they're very sort of outward to other people focused. Whereas with the NTPs, it usually has more to do with reasoning and the need to have many different perspectives and to not zero in on just one goal, but to kind of constantly keep thinking about different things. So that's a quick and
No,
dirty.
yeah, that's good. And I just, and we talked about this in the first episode, and I think I'm realizing how much of a struggle, though it is very NI oriented, like let's encapsulate all this into one name. So like
Yeah,
we kind of figured that with the monarchic types, maybe if you were to do a second edition, you might call them the aristocratic types. And then we kind of
right,
bounced that idea around. Do you think that democratic is I know that you did it to contrast monarchic, but do you think
right.
democratic is the best now that you've kind of talked about it a bunch?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, that leads into the one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is one of the problems I've run into is that particularly and this is partly because NTPs generally are more interested in my work than SFJs have been because of the
Right.
intuition, sensation problems and stuff like that. But especially as I've looked back at it, I do think that democratic, while I still hold to it as essentially true, it does give connotations that definitely set NTPs off, because they often, I see your expression there where you're kind of like, Michael, the NTPs are the ones who are telling people off and don't work well with others and all this stuff. Like they are not. And you have Socrates, who I do believe was an ENTP, who was anti-democracy, right? And that's like a fundamental part. And it's kind of interesting how when I wrote it, I wasn't really thinking about those things as much, and it's just become more clear. So I still hold to it, but I don't know what else you would call it, because I do still believe that, um, and I think a part of the problem might be that the the concepts we have available in our language present dichotomies that have connotations that don't actually match up with the reality of the personality types, where being, quote, democratic in the way that I'm talking about it in the book does not necessarily mean you, um, see, for example, One of my professors in college was an INTP, ENTP. It was kind of hard to tell which one, but we had a very productive, if frustrating, relationship at times because I'm the INFJ, so we kind of have like a Bertrand Russell Wittgenstein relationship going on, where he keeps sort of poking me and he gave like this assignment, for example, where he's like, what you need to do is I want you to start with a topic and then break that topic up into subtopics, and then break each of those topics into subtopics. And whenever I've done this, it's created all this creativity and people flower and bloom and it's beautiful. And I hated that project because I couldn't, it was like, knew it was a typological thing with my NI, because I was like, I can't break these things up. I don't, because there's like a million different ways I could break it up and it's all arbitrary. So there's this manifoldness to the NTPs, and that's part of what I'm trying to get at. The other thing, and this will be my final point, so I'm not talking the whole time, but is the other thing that he said that has always stuck with me as and my father has actually, who's an INTP, has made comments along the same lines, where they've emphasized the need to make sure you are getting new experiences and that you're going out into the world, and that you are, I know that probably sounds SE-ish stereotypically, but what they meant by it was, what you don't want to do is end up as a crank in a cabin who, writes a manifesto and
Uncle
doesn't
Ted.
talk. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's not literally afraid of in my case, but that's what they're kind of going against. Is like, oh, the reason he went crazy was he didn't talk with anybody or submit his ideas to be criticized by other perspectives and question himself. He was too. The other thing that my NTP professor, one of the last things that he said to me, and I think he regretted saying it, but he said it at the spur of the moment. He said, it was along the lines of, I'm pretty sure you'll be a force for good in the world, but you remind me too much of Karl Marx, who destroyed the world. That's what he felt. Yeah, he was more of a conservative, but in his mind, he viewed Karl Marx as having this sort of NI hubris that he saw in me, I think, and of having this sort of visionary quality that is going to dictate what's going to happen. And he's more of like Karl Popper, who's like, no, you can't see into the future. There's too many different possibilities. You choose one. What you're doing is you're choosing one and you're sweeping all the others aside as irrelevant. And I want to bring those back in. So that's why it's like you're excluding people from the democracy. You're making it just an aristocracy intellectually. And I'm trying to bring in all these other voices. So I think they come across as anti-democratic insofar as they will attack individuals and they won't discriminate which individuals they will attack. So they'll come across as, oh, you don't like people, when really they're doing it specifically because they care about the whole of all of the different people and perspectives. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense, but it's definitely not. I mean, obviously it's not apparent to me right away. When NTP, because I know you have, and we'll talk about it in a different episode, you have the anarchic types, I believe, as well.
Yes.
I feel like that's where the NTPs would be, just from a archetype perspective.
Right.
Being
you do have a lot of anarchists who I think are NTP types. That is very true.
Right. And I don't know, it seems to, I don't know why that would be, but you write, so I'm looking at, this is for people that have the book on page 160, you have the Devil's Advocate, which is the ENTP section, and you say they want to perceive what is in every direction, forward and behind, up to the very extremities of the circle. So with his task to you, which is like, you could say it's either break it subtopics or break it down to subcategories, but like start with the center of the circle and just go as far out as you can into like every single realm that this one subject, it is very annoying because NI is seeking concision, and
I want to find the center of the circle. And it's like it seems irrelevant or going backwards to split up that center. I just want to hop from center to center.
Yeah. And I think when I wrote my book, I purposely, it ended up kind of being blessing, but the gal that I had, Marina, she was an ENTP, is a copywriter editor, and it just happened to be her NE helped me annoyingly write the book, because I pretty much wrote maybe 10,000 more words, given her like, hey, I need examples, I need more. What is it, like poking me, and I doesn't really want to go back once it's gone forward. It doesn't want to like retread and take back steps. So that was beneficial from our relationship, but I'm definitely going to have her there for my next book. But there is value to that
absolutely.
type. Yeah, the hard part is to not classify it as like too specific, because you could say something like, oh, they're FE could be more of like the counselor type or the mentor, but that's one archetype. It doesn't encompass the full quadra. So the really hard thing is like when I throw in the NTPs, which are in my mind, I think, anarchists. So how do you do it? And that's why it's hard to be concise, because people have to see the archetype in their head and go, obviously that's an ENTP and an SFJ.
Yes.
So I do not envy you in that sense, especially like coming up with your own labels for them.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Have you ever read Carl Sagan?
Oh, a little bit.
Okay.
A little bit. I know who you're talking about.
So Carl Sagan wrote Cosmos, and I'm not a man of science by any means. So I was like, but I'm going to read a science book. And throughout the entire book, I was like, this is the most INTP book ever. But then I realized he's an ENTJ. He's been typed ENTJ, which is the shadow INTP. So I'm like, what is going on there? But his writing style is so TI.
Yeah.
That it was it was brilliant, but it was too much for me.
Interesting.
So
in the sense of he was, like I was saying, he was getting caught in the weeds, or that he was spending too much time on stuff that didn't seem to have practical application, or?
Well, I guess it was just like the way I approached it was like, well, I've read many ENTJs, like Tony Robbins is an ENTJ. He writes a 600-page book called Unlimited Power. He writes another book called.
Some people type him as ESFP, but either way, it's a monarchic type. I mean, there's no way he's not monarchic.
And then he has another book called Awaken the Giant Within, and you're like, I don't even need to tell you what type it is. I don't need to read it. I know. And he's all about like TE applications for unlimited success. And I'm like, but then Carl Sagan is writing, and you could swear he's an INTP by reading it, but then everyone says, oh, his speaking style and like his presentations, his lectures are ENTJ. So I guess how do we this is kind of like a random, how do you reconcile that? Because it doesn't make sense to me.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, actually, because I was thinking about not Carl Sagan specifically, but my dad, actually, who I have noticed living with him. I consider him very much an INTP, but he's very strongly typed, I think. But I have noticed things about the way he'll talk about certain issues where it's like, that sounds like an ENTJ would say that, where because they are shadow types. So, and I think that's very important. So just to fill that out a little bit, specifically when it comes to, he particularly in relation with my church has been in a number of leadership positions, which has been interesting because he is, when he's in leadership, he has, I guess he's maybe learned, or he has become very pragmatic, and he tends to come off, I think, as more of, he will adopt ENTJ-ish style, or things that I associate with the ENTJ. It's like they kind of blur into each other, because he'll be very focused on, listen, what is it we are trying to do? Everybody's talking, everybody has all these different opinions, and none of it matters. Like, I'm looking at it and none of it's all irrelevant. You're just trying to make yourselves feel good, which is an INTP thing to say, though. So I'm not really answering your question, but at this point I am acknowledging there's, although they, in my system, they ought to be like day and night, like all of the types that whenever you have these oppositions, it's like they wrap back around into each other.
Yeah.
I think I've definitely seen that with INFJs and ENFPs, at least in myself, where I have very much noticed tendencies in myself that are more stereotypically ENFP in the way I will, when I'm really comfortable in the way I express myself, I'll start talking really fast. I'll start hopping from idea to idea. I start getting really, it's like this sort of stereotypical ENFP,
Right.
whereas the ENFPs will sometimes do the opposite, where they'll become very more stereotypically INFJ. So
Yeah.
yeah, but how do you tell them apart? That is what we will discuss today.
Yeah.
I
Here's a
guess.
and it's not, there's not really, type is never ending question. So there's no like,
Yeah.
there's no, when you start in type, you absolutely feel like you know everything. Like that's an ENTJ. But in having conversations with you and other people, experts in the community, and even people that have been, in type since, Isabel Myers is still alive, they're very hesitant to say anything definitively. It's like,
Yeah.
well, their preferences are that, or they'll say
Yeah.
he looks like an INTP, but like the first couple weeks in type, you're like, I know, I can type
Yeah,
anyone. It's
exactly.
so funny. So here's a
Exactly.
question that came up, and I'm gonna, as you were talking, that I'm gonna try to be concise because I think you're gonna know what I'm getting at. But do the democratic types have their own beliefs?
Yes.
They do.
Yes, though we'll probably have to, because from the look you're giving me, I think I know what you're trying to go for. The reason I'm saying yes is because I'm looking at my copy of the book right over there. In there, I think so where were you going with it? Just so that
Well, yeah, that's sort of just like, you could go anywhere. Basically, like FE types can tend to just take on the social, whatever's people are telling them is the right thing to do. That's what I'll adopt for harmony.
right.
And like ENTPs, I think can with FI and FE being so low, they can either use it FE in a manipulative way, or they just will argue whatever side wins.
Right.
I will argue that side, or I will
Excuse me.
take that side just to win. But if I were to say, like, what do you believe about this? They'll go, well, it depends. And you'll go, okay, so you
Yes.
can't tell me what you actually believe. You can tell me what it takes to win this argument, or you can tell me the two sides of the argument, but won't pick one.
That is a very good point. So, what I would and I think this hits right on the head
Okay.
of how the monarchic types see belief and how the democratic types see belief. I think so. I think this will link up. In the book, one of the things I try to emphasize is that it's particularly evident in the INTP and the ISFJ because they're the more introverted ones, but probably one of the primary differences between the democratic types and the monarchic types is the democratic types see truth, or what they should do, or what is sort of the what would you call it? The truth with a capital T is usually the best way to put it. Though I'll get into the skepticism that you often find in NTPs in a moment. But truth with a capital T is something that is not within you per se. It is something that is discovered. But it's not in the material world at all. It is something that is outside in like this realm of the mind, if you will. And they are trying to discover it, but it is not a part of themselves. This is particularly clear in ethics. So sort of Kant, one of the premier examples I think of an INTP, the categorical imperative, where it is he was trying to figure out, can I base ethics purely in rational, almost mathematical structures, and where it is all self-referential, almost tautological, but it ultimately has no reference to what I desire as an individual, because that is irrelevant. What I desire, that's contingent. I might desire something today, I might desire something tomorrow, but what I want is to grab a hold of, I picture it as almost like this iron rod outside of them. Whereas with the monarchic types, they're like, there's a fire inside of me, and I don't want to give up myself to grab hold of this outside thing. It's like they don't, you have like Ayn Rand, who sort of voices, I think, things that a lot of monarchic types have thought, but they've known better than to say it quite as directly. But she just comes out and says what I think they think, where she's like, Kant was the most evil man who ever lived, because he's like this. He is trying to take away my FI from me and say that is not what is true. And you shouldn't try to benefit yourself. You should benefit other people. But I don't know what other people want. Who am I to judge what other people want? What the peons or the people who are maybe even better than me want? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of rambling here, but I think you see where I'm going with this. So in terms of belief, it's the way that you're talking about belief, I just sort of sense has an FI tinge to it, because I've had the same problem where people have asked me, what do you believe on this issue? And my instant reaction is to say, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on, because I don't want to, because I know that I do have an FI position in my heart, but I regard that as irrelevant because I'm concerned about my FI position being blind in relation to what other people need, and I don't want to step on other people's toes. So if you ask me, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but you ask me about any controversial position. What do you think of Trump? What do you think of Biden or something? I know from experience, but I've had to really search down deep for it, because I think, my FI is down in there, but I know it's there, which is part of why I've become more receptive to the sort of the 8 function model, but more in the sense of, like, if you have the 4 functions, then it implies a relationship to the other 4 functions. So either way, but if I look down deep in myself, I know I'll have, like, and it'll be often a very juvenile feeling, a very basic feeling of, like, screw that person, wow, it's like pure id. And I'm like, well, I don't want to voice that because that has no intellectual value. And that's also, I'm embarrassed about it because it's not very well felt out, if you will. But that's what the FI type wants, because that's what activates them. But that's precisely what I am refusing to give them. So I tend to walk around the subject in this FE way and say, well, I think about this side of the issue and I think about this side of it. And they're like, that's not what I'm asking. I can ask those people if I wanted to know about it, but I'm asking you how you feel. And I'm like, I will not, I plead the 5th. So,
Yes. So I
don't know if that helps.
It does help. I feel like what you're describing is more about what I have described when I did my I'm doing a series of, like, the politics of a function, which is totally, I don't know. I say, like, I don't know if you can really do it, but I'm going to try. So, like, my latest one was, the first one was the politics of NI, and then the next one was politics of NE.
It's actually extremely interesting. I haven't watched those. I need to take a look at it.
That's fine. And I'll ask you, I'll say it here because ENFP is, like, kind of in my head, I think, like, they will tell you, if you say, like, they can tell you all the isms, communism, capitalism, what they all mean. They can tell you how they interlink and, like, the differences and similarities. And then you'll say, okay, so, like, what do you, like, what's your position? Well, back in 2008, I was this, but now I'm more this. And then what you always get, and I say always because that's my type, you always get, I'm an independent.
Right.
And you'll go, okay,
with
well,
the
that's not a
ENFPs,
position.
absolutely, because they like to have their wardrobe, and they have all of these different masks in the wardrobe, or outfits in the wardrobe that they've worn over the years. And when they wear them, they get into character. But ENFPs, I think, often will have identity issues where they will feel that I'm just like ENTP. It's almost like this even more extreme version of what happens with ENTPs, because ENTPs will feel sometimes that they don't have a soul, or that they don't have a kernel in the center, because they're so focused on the NE outside here and on all these different positions. And I can argue from these different sides. But with the ENFP, they're almost even more uprooted, because at least the ENTP has this sense of the iron rod truth. Even if he doesn't believe, or she doesn't believe, that we can ever grasp it intellectually and we can only just reason our way around it and approximate it. Even if they believe that, the ENFP is uprooted because they have the FITE.
Right.
So in addition to seeing things in sort of this running around the circle and sort of almost trying to approximate the truth, they're also very in touch with what they want and what they feel. So I think in the book, I say, so basically what you get is a little rocket ship, whereas the ENTP at least is orbiting something. The ENFP is doing everything they can to visit every planet they can find. So they can tell you all these different isms,
Yes.
But they don't want to associate themselves with any one of them, because then, well, but there could be more that I could find. And yeah.
It's so in my I'll send you the videos because I think you might have some takes on them, but I think that you can say that the functions as they sit by themselves, which is a hard thing to do because we know they always have an axis, sure. But do they have a political stance? Do each of them? And I put like the controversial NI types and the controversial NE types. And it's just interesting because I think that the extroverted ones are easier to see where they might stand politically.
Yeah.
But the introverted ones are hard because it's like, well, it's definitely going to be subjective, but it's just a fun thing to talk about. But I think NE will always give you, it depends, or I don't know yet, or I was this, now I'm this. So getting back to the democratic type. So talk a little bit more about the SFJs, because I know some ESFJs in my life, but I wish I knew more ISFJs. I love the kind of memes about them. Like they're kind of like the stay-at-home mom, or the very like homely type that has 12 kids for you. It's like, that's how I see them. But like, tell me about them and relate, like in your personal life, and then maybe in relation to the NTPs.
Well, my mother is an ISFJ. I believe. And so I feel and my younger sister is an ESFJ. And then my dad's an INTP. So I come from a very, and then my older sister, I believe, is also an ISFJ. So I come from a very democratic family. Maybe I should have mentioned that at the beginning.
There it is.
And that is probably, so I have experience in in what I'm saying.
Good for you.
But anyway, the one thing that I have come to realize about the ISFJs is that it's important to understand there's a lot of structural similarities with the INFJ, more than I think is often talked about or realized. There's very important differences that are linked with the NISI, obviously, but because the FE and the TI are in the same positions, I think you get similar behaviors with the INFJ and the ISFJ. And I think it's possible there's plenty of INFJs who are technically ISFJs, but they tested as INFJs because they're very creative ISFJs and they're very interested in philosophy or whatever. But anyway, my experience with the other important thing to note is that the stereotype of, my mother is a stay-at-home mom, so that fits nicely with that. But I'm trying to think of a good example, like Gandhi. I'm jumping around a lot, but you take Gandhi, who literally starves himself in front of everybody in order to get them to stop doing such and such. That is like the most IFJ move ever, I've decided.
Is that the people that immolate themselves?
Yes, that too. Yeah. In fact, that in a way is a particularly INFJ because it is so showy. It has this SE element to it. There's this showmanship to it, where even if it's unconscious, where Dostoevsky talks about this in The Idiot, actually, where that's effectively what the female character in the first part does, is she immolates herself to get back at the other people. So you see there's this element where they don't want to engage in a TE way. They don't want to, because they don't know how, and it's just frustrating for them, and they don't think that way. They're very self-contained, but they still want to achieve things. And so there can be a tendency to passive aggressiveness in INFJs and ISFJs, which at its best can be amazing tactfulness, and at its worst can be actual passive aggressiveness, where they they'll be like, I'm just not going to talk to this person anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to them anymore. They're effectively turning their thinking against themselves. It's like they're TEing themselves in order to get the other person to do something. The amazing thing is that Gandhi's strategy worked. I remember reading somebody talking about it and being like, basically he starved himself and just guilted people into doing what he wanted. And I remember reading that and being like, you're technically correct, but also I'm angry because there's more to it than that, because I'm an INFJ and I understand that he's but I could talk forever about that.
No, and that's fine.
And
I think that with the SFJ, SIFE doesn't seem to have like confrontational or like it doesn't seem to have that ability for or desire to have showmanship or make giant, like, Steve Jobs, a dent in the world. They don't seem to have that desire.
No, they don't at all. That's one of the big differences with the INFJ and the ISFJ, is they don't have that desire to be showy. And it's I think an SI thing. They also tend to they're much more self-contained in that way, and they can seem much more humble. They don't have, at least it's perfectly possible for an ISFJ to have delusions of grandeur, but they won't have it in the same way. They don't have, pardon me, one of the important things in, maybe this might be a better way to approach the democratic types than emphasizing the democracy aspect, is to emphasize the eschewing of the ego that I think you find in NTPs and SFJs, because, like I said before, they're seeking a truth that is perceived as outside themselves, as a principle that they have a responsibility to hold on to. So they don't trust what they themselves feel. They are eschewing themselves. They're eschewing their own ego.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas with the NTJs and SFPs, they are about improving the ego, and the ego is where it's like, no, don't grab hold of these external things. Those are external to you. They're not you. You are running, as Nietzsche would say, you're running away from yourself. Nietzsche is like the ultimate anti-ESFJ, because like there's so many things he says that are 100% just I'm like his sister or mother or somebody was an ESFJ, and he's just sick and tired of it.
I have a little bronze, it's right there. It's kind of hidden, but that's a little like 6 foot tall Nietzsche like bronze figure.
You need to show that to me after the interview.
It's so funny. I will. But I think this is a good place to end, because so we did the monarchic types first. We did the democratic types, and then I think next show we should do the theocratic types. Okay. Then we'll do the fourth show, which is the anarchic types. And yeah, this has been super fun. And in the meantime, everyone, if you haven't already, Motes and Beams, Michael Pierce, just such a great book, so interesting. It's very NI in that it's not it's not just type, it's socionics, it's Chinese spirituality, I believe, and then it's smidgen, then just puts it all together in a very concise. I mean, it's all that said, it is concise. So Michael, any last words for this episode?
Just that I would sum up that after all our discussion, I would say for now, egoless versus ego focused, and then we can discuss that more maybe in the next episode.
You know what I'm gonna do? I think I don't really have that big of a following, but maybe I should post it in the community tab.
Sure.
And ask what people think it could be renamed to, because I'm on this kick now of like, okay, I think democratic one's really hard to rename. There's a word there that's somewhere back here that might be better, but I'm trying to, not that it needs to be improved, but I want to try.
Sure.
I feel like through this conversation, we've realized because you said it in the last time, I accidentally didn't realize how political people will take it.
Yes, I underestimated that people would immediately, because I'm not a very politically focused person.
Definitely not. No.
So as you could probably tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I took that for granted. Yeah.
But it's fine. Well, Michael, thanks for being here. Everyone needs to buy the book, subscribe to his channel, and we'll maybe in a week or two we'll have the next part of the temperaments, which is the theocratic types.
I tried to live without you, just can't get you off my mind.